Hello, my name is Kaitlin McFadden. I teach clarinet and saxophone at REW Music. So I fell in love with saxophone pretty quick after I started playing it. I actually played clarinet first. In 5th grade, I chose clarinet and I loved it and got eventually into the habit of practicing more consistently once I got into high school. And my senior year of high school, I decided, you know what sounds fun? Jazz band. Jazz band sounds very fun. But of course most typical jazz bands don't have arrangements for clarinet. I thought, well, that's silly, but that's fine, I'll learn the saxophone. And so I did. I checked out a saxophone the summer before my senior year, and my assistant band director at my high school was a saxophone player and was just a phenomenal lady. And she gave me a couple of lessons once school started just to kind of get me going. And yeah, I just have always loved, particularly doing jazz on saxophone, just because I think that's one of its strengths is jazz, but it's just such a different animal than clarinet and specifically classical music. It's definitely something that put me out of my comfort zone, which I think was very good for me. I like, as my high school friends said, I like playing the notes that are on the page, and jazz sometimes has you play notes that are not on the page, and that stretched me as a musician and it helped me to grow, and I like being able to teach that to my students and teach them how to play the notes that aren't on the page. So in my lessons I like to use a variety of styles and genres just because it keeps it interesting for the students as well as keeping it interesting for myself. Of course, when you think about saxophone, oftentimes people will think of jazz, and so we do a lot of jazz in lessons if the student is interested. But jazz contains a lot of subgenres within. So you have your traditional swing, you've got a lot of Latin genres, you've got your samba, you've got your bossa, then there's slow ballads, and so there's lots of different genres within jazz itself. But rock and roll, I mean, there's a lot of trumpet and saxophone now that's being used in rock and roll, in popular music, and so I don't think there's any genre that can't be played on the saxophone. I've never tried playing rap on the saxophone, so that's where I might have a question, but sometimes I'll have a student ask me, oh, well, I don't know if there's music for that for the saxophone. It's like, we can find it, and if it doesn't exist, we will make it happen. So I like to use all sorts of different genres because it's fun, and why not? So the KMEA alto piece that I played was the Etude No. 3 from the 48 Studies, and that one, it is slower in tempo, but there's a lot of complex things going on in that piece. So the thing that I found that students have had the most trouble with so far is the combination trill grace note. That happens twice. So my recommendation is to forget about those things for a second. Just play the rhythm. Make sure you have the correct rhythm and notes without the trill and without the grace note at first. Once you've got that down, once that feels comfortable, then add whichever one you feel more comfortable with. If you're more comfortable with grace notes, then add the grace notes back in. And then play it a couple times with the grace notes. And then try adding the trill in. If that's too much, then I would recommend doing it once with just the trill. And then eventually you'll feel comfortable enough with playing it with just the trill, playing it with just the grace notes, and then you can add them all together and have beautiful music. So it is a very expressive piece as well, and so dynamics are the other very, very important thing on this excerpt. There's a lot of very loud sections, there's a lot of fortissimos, there's a lot of soft sections as well. And then there's the dreaded very large interval jump toward the end, and so you go, I believe it's a low B to a high F, so just kind of mentally prepare for that, and that will help. That's also one of the places that you go from a piano to a forte, and so going up in your register obviously is louder, and so use that to your advantage when you're working on dynamics.